As Bunny Folger died, her last words were 14, 14, and savage, savage, pointing the finger quite clearly at Charles Hayden Savage, who lives on the 14th floor of the Arconia. We can expect Mabel to have some distrust of Charles, just as in Season 1, Charles and Oliver had mistrust of Mabel. Here we go again. But this is a murder mystery. Could it not be 14, but actually 1414? If you Google 1414, the first result is Angel. But of course, there's also the Disability Section 1414 and New York Consolidated Laws on Insurance 1414. I wonder what that painting was insured for. Let's solve Only Murders in the Building, Season 2, Episode 1, Persons of Interest. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on our hunt to learn who killed Bunny Folger, who framed Mabel for Bunny's murder, why was Bunny in Mabel's apartment wearing a tie-dye hoodie, who sent the text message to Charles and Oliver which read, "Get out of the building now," who poisoned Winnie the dog, what made the noise that bothered Dr. Grover Stanley, why did the police scuttle the toxology report on Tim Kono's death. That's right, guys, we're still dealing with mysteries from the first season. We'll also have a visit from Double M Matt Murdock with a musical analysis of Episode 1. Spoilers for the first season of Only Murders in the Building and the first episode of Season 2. If you haven't seen all 11 episodes, pause this video and go pick up a new hobby, as long as it's not knitting. It's a new season, so that means there are new double C's, credit clues. In the opening credits for Season 2, Episode 1, if you look closely at Charles's apartment, you'll see a painting in there. Is it the Rose Cooper painting? Also, in the other double C's closing credits, there's a wine bottle and a bunny figurine, and a bit of the Rose Cooper painting is seen on a puzzle piece. Please subscribe to this podcast, follow this podcast, and if you're on YouTube, stab that like button with either a knife or with knitting needles. Hey, it's your preference. Before we run down the suspects in this case, let's see what Episode 1 of Season 2 taught us about our victim, Arconia Board President, or scratch that, former Board President, Bunny Folger. Apartment 12A. Bunny was stabbed with a knife, not necessarily with the knitting needles. Bunny lives in apartment 12A, the apartment that Mabel's aunt, Salma Ramirez, used to own back when Mabel was a kid. How Bunny ended up in that apartment and Mabel's aunt moved to apartment 12E, we still don't know the history quite yet. Why was Bunny in a tie-dye sweatshirt for the podcast crew that she hates? It's unlikely that the killer held Bunny at gunpoint or knife point or knitting needle point and told her to wear this tie-dye sweatshirt. It's also unlikely that she was forced into Mabel's apartment. So seemingly she went there with the person who had that knife, you would assume. We know certain things about Bunny from Season 1. As head of the apartment board, we might assume that she had access to everybody's apartment. She would get people's mail, including Tim Kono's. She knows sign language. As president of the Arconia board members, Bunny created a rule where if you had 8 complaints against you, you could be evicted from the building. Now, of course, Tim had more than 8 complaints. He had no trouble. She owned a yellow-headed Amazon parrot, Mrs. Gambolini. She also owned a Rose Cooper painting worth millions. Her apartment has several other mysteries, including why she has a unique elevator located in her closet, an elevator which note lists only 11 floors. The Arconia has 14 floors, technically 13 at a penthouse, but there's no 13th floor, so it goes straight from 12 to 14, and then there's the penthouse. So how in the world does this elevator say there are only 11 floors? It's tough to tell, but there also could be a video edit which implies the elevator thinks Bunny's apartment is on the 7th floor when we know it's on the 12th. Now this gets very confusing, but if the 7th equals the 12th floor, then the 1st floor equals the 6th floor, aka the floor Jan lived on. And when the podcast crew does exit the elevator we assume on the ground or 1st floor, they are up on top of some roof. So it's a bit difficult to see exactly what's going on here. Bunny also received a card, we can assume this wasn't planted there, that read, "Bunny Folger, I want that painting." Is this handwriting familiar to handwriting we saw in Season 1? Let's look at the suspects, and we'll be asking about these suspects all season long: the who, the how, the why, and the why now. First suspect is Uma Heller from apartment 3F. Believe it or not, this episode is the first time Uma's name has been said out loud on the show. We only know her name is Uma because of a post-it note Charles pasted on his murder board back in season 1, which also showed that she was in apartment 3F. Now, we know from season 1, Tim Kono yelled at Uma for smoking outside. We know she's a smoker. At various times throughout the season, we would see Uma on floors where she didn't live. She lived on the 3rd, but we'd see her on the 6th floor for some reason. In this episode, Uma specifically brings Howard in to show an expensive painting that she believes Bunny has in her bedroom, and then she's shocked that it isn't there. Does she know the painting isn't there and is bringing Howard in there to be a witness that she was shocked that the painting was missing? Uma Heller, suspect 1. Howard Morris, who lives on the 3rd floor, 3C. Howard, we learned in season 1, has a dead cat named Evelyn, who most likely snuck into Tim Kono's apartment, licked his blood after he had been killed, and the poison that killed Tim killed sweet cat Evelyn. Now, Howard faints at the sight of blood, so him stabbing somebody could be shocking. Of course, when he was brought into the bedroom by Uma, he had a delayed scream, and really only screamed because Uma was screaming. He acts like he doesn't know that there was supposed to be a painting in there, but of course, that could be an act. Howard was also quick to divert Uma's attention from the closet where the secret elevator was and back out into Bunny's apartment. Suspect 3 is a new character this year, Alice Banks. Alice runs Art Del Sur, an art collective, and Alice becomes very interested in Mabel's work and more. Alice's Instagram handle is GoAskAlice. Now, she writes to Mabel multiple times, first with a couple responses like, "Love this mural." Let's focus on this for a little bit, because the Instagram posting doesn't show the entire mural. If you can trust this screen capture of this Instagram post, you only see Miss Indoko, Oliver, Winnie the dog, Mabel herself, Charles, Jan, Uma, the Demuses, Howard, and Oscar. Bunny's image isn't shown at all in the Instagram post. What about this mural got Alice's interest so much? Was it one of these characters? Was it something in one of these characters? Alice also writes an Instagram comment to Mabel saying, "These comments, ... And finally, "Hey, check your DMs," where she invites Mabel down to her art collective, Art Del Sur. Suspect 4 is Amy Schumer. Tiny Mouth is in the penthouse up on the 14th floor. Amy Schumer really knows the podcast, so therefore she has heard Mabel's dream of stabbing somebody with knitting needles. She knows it well enough to do a callback to the turkey that the team brought to Sting back in season 1. Let's look at our big 3. Are they involved in any way? First up, Oliver Putnam on the 10th floor. We know he's broke. We know he didn't like Bunny, who was going to kick him out of the building, which he told his son Will is all he had. He also has a very odd reaction to Amy Schumer claiming they'll know who poisoned Winnie. It seems unlikely that Jan poisoned Winnie the dog. We also learned about Oliver that his attorney is either dead or disbarred, or possibly both. He was writing notes to Bunny telling her he wanted her dead. Oliver has been living in the Arconia since at least 2005, but before then, 25 years ago, he was in Los Angeles. We still don't know the story about why Oliver broke up with his ex-wife Roberta. Charles Hayden Savage. He lives up on the 14th floor. Theoretically, there's nothing above him except the penthouse. In this episode, we learn that Charles's father was in a painting done by Rose Cooper that at one point was in Bunny's apartment and now is in his. His father, who he claims spent the last few years of his life in and out of prison. There's Mabel Mora in apartment 12E. Bloody Mabel, with the Insta handle, "Maybe it's Mabel." Mabel didn't like Bunny, in fact called her the B word, bitch, in the episode where Bunny died. Mabel also has a bizarre memory issue where she seems to black out, remembering exactly what happened when she entered her apartment on the night Bunny died. Mabel is withholding things Bunny said from Charles and Oliver, specifically the fact that she said savage, savage. Mabel's dad bought her a jigsaw puzzle of Frida when she was 4. Mabel mentions this to Alice, and that could be a huge clue for the season because the hashtags on Twitter all have a puzzle piece emoji. Again, Mabel's aunt lived in 12A when she was a kid, and now Mabel lives in 12E. But Mabel knows, and in fact, in the very first episode of season 1, mentioned that she has a way to get into Bunny's apartment. It's unlikely that Bunny would have used the same way to sneak into Mabel's apartment. Listeners, are there suspects that we haven't mentioned? Should we consider new character Detective Krebs a new suspect in this? Is Charles's father, even though we believe he's passed away, somehow tied into this mystery? What do you think? Write to us and tell us your suspect list. At Double PHQ, the word double, single letter P, HQ for headquarters on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/Double PHQ. On YouTube, leave those comments down below. Who are the suspects we're not looking at right now, who aren't in this episode? Like Oscar, Oliver's son Will, Ursula, Arnov, Lester the Doorman, Jose Torres, Miss Indoko, Dr. Grover Stanley, Amy Huang. Who have we left off? Before we give some of our tinfoil hat theories and some of your great feedback, let's go to our musical expert, Matt Murdock, who's at Musical Concepts on Twitter, for a breakdown of episode 1.
Hey guys, Matt here. Just wanted to point out just a couple of things that Siddhartha did in the first episode of season 2 of Only Murders in the Building, just to put a little bit of new twist and new edge on things. They're very simple, what we call variations, meaning that they're basically the same theme. They're just changed up a little bit for reasons to kind of change your emotion. The first thing that I'd like to point out is in the matter of rhythm. Remember that I like to look at melodic shape, harmony, rhythm, and timbre in order to see how a film composer tells a story. Well, rhythm was a big key here. For instance, you get the chords of the main theme as Mabel and the boys are walking out of the police station and they're greeted by the press. But rather than getting the typical 6/4 or 3/4 or 6/8 rhythm or count, instead we get a 4 count. Instead of this kind of flowing time signature, he changes the meter to 4, but still fits 3 beats in the 4. And it makes it feel like that last beat is cut off a little bit, like this. Little tricks like that help to raise the tension. But one of my favorite variations in this episode actually came when Mabel was scrubbing the blood from the floor. We heard a combination of strings and piano doing this. It's a little bit of a variation in the melody, but the chords are pretty much the same. But here's why it's interesting. He started to use notes in his melody that didn't exactly fit. In fact, it was a half step off, telling us that this whole business is really having an effect on Mabel. The different note is this one. It just doesn't fit with any of those chords. Not unless you are implying what we call a diminished harmony. And diminished harmonies are typically very uncomfortable. At any rate, I just wanted to point that out, and I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Season 2 of Omit B, Only Murders in the Building.
Because it's so early in the season, let's go down some never-ending tunnels and rabbit holes and elevators here in the Arconia to come up with some crazy theories. Now remember, Alice's art collective is known as Art del Sur. An anagram of Art del Sur is adulterers. What about Alice herself? Alice Banks is her name. What's a fun anagram of Alice Banks? Backline! Okay, let's stay in tinfoil hat theory. Because this episode has so few clues, let's go with the least likely scenario. Bunny suicide. Now, I know you're thinking, Bunny was stabbed by a knife, we can't find the knife. How in the world could this have been a suicide? Well, in the first season of Only Murders in the Building, the why and the why now were kind of tricky, the least clues about. So hey, we could come up with our own why and why now. Bunny, let's say she has health issues and she knows she's going to pass away. So she's going to die, but she wants to die on her terms, specifically sticking it to the podcast 3 who've been so terrible to her in her final days. She comes up with a partner. Say it's Uma or Howard, who we know she's ridden in elevators with and seems to be close to. What she does is she says, let's frame that terrible trio for murder. We'll sneak into Mabel's apartment. You can stab me, but remember in the podcast, they said knitting needles. So you stab me with a knife, run out, then I'll take some knitting needles and I'll put them in my chest and I'll fall on Mabel and frame her for murder. Wait, that may not be enough. That may just implicate Mabel. So hey, partner in this crime, take the painting out of my apartment and go put it in Charles's apartment. We're going to frame these people. That's a crazy theory, but hey, it's kind of crazy that Jan turned out to be insane as well. So craziness works here. All season long, we want to know your theories at DoublePHQ on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/DoublePHQ. Put those crazy theories, smart theories, intelligent theories down in the comments. And we had feedback even before the season began. We got a great email. And how do you email us? Well, go to our website, doublepmedia.com, and click on our email link, which is hello@doublepmedia.com. This email came from Danielle Rigo from Melbourne, Australia. Daniel's list of suspects of who could have killed Bunny include Oscar's dad. He could have killed Bunny and tried to frame Mabel as revenge for Oscar hanging out with Mabel and getting him arrested for Zoe's death. Daniel also lists Howard. Bunny did threaten to have him evicted when he stood up for the podcast trio in a meeting near the end of season 1. Could it be Cindy Canning or her assistant Poppy? How else could Cindy Canning have gotten on the scene so quickly there in season 1? There's also Alice, he suspects, mainly because she's a new character. Is the killer linked to the Demuses or Jan? Daniel writes. Daniel has a couple other questions in his feedback. He said, was Bunny the intended target? It was a tie-dye hoodie in Mabel's apartment. Maybe somebody wanted to kill Oscar or Mabel. Daniel has a lot of fun other thoughts, and we love reading them. We want to hear your theories. Down below in the YouTube comments, at DoublePHQ, Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/DoublePHQ. Go to our website, doublepmedia.com, and send us an email, hello@doublepmedia.com. We want to know what you think. We're going to be releasing these podcasts the day after each episode drops, so each Wednesday for the next 9 weeks. But this week, we're going to have our video breaking down episode 2 coming up in a couple days. Help us put these puzzle pieces together to figure out who killed Arconia board president Bunny Folger. Let's solve Only Murders in the Building. We want to hear from you, listeners. Don't be like #OllyMabel. We don't want you to be silent.